we'll do open Q&A. I see your questions; they're here. I see there's some pretty serious questions that you'd like to ask Rabbi Shachat. Please stay on the line. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome. We're very honored to have a very esteemed Dayan, senior shliach. He's for us it's 9 o'clock at night, but for him it's already tomorrow, Thursday, 11 a.m. And it was quite an honor that he was able to join us. And I'm going to call up Rabbi Yehoram Ulman, who is the Av Beis Din of the Beis Din in Sydney, Australia, and somebody who's a well-known halachic authority. He's going to talk about a very practical thing. I've been telling people that Baruch Hashem, that so many Yidden make a parnasa online. Really, in this crazy time that we're living in right now with the coronavirus that has really shaken up the whole world, people that sell online, though, that are positioned correctly, have actually, Baruch Hashem, been doing well. Of course, people can't go to stores, and the demand for purchasing online has only grown and grown. And that's just the way forward. We're going into this new world where online is becoming ubiquitous, to use a fancy word. And it's been taken for granted that you could have a website and it could be open on Shabbos. I mean, everyone has a website that's sort of there on Shabbos, but people have their websites and they just don't they don't process the order, but then they process it after, or they're selling on Amazon and eBay, and people sort of just assume that it's totally okay. The question is, are there any, shilos and things to be aware of? And so we asked Rabbi Ulman to talk about this very important topic. So without further ado, I asked Rabbi Ulman to please, if you could take over the, unmute yourself and your video, and you'll give a 25-minute presentation, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. Again, for those of you watching, there's a Q&A box. You could post your questions there, and we will get to all of the questions as they are posed. So, Rabbi Ulman,
I'm trying to open my video, but it says that.
Okay, you are.
Now
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
And thank
you. Sure. I was listening to the last part of Rabbi Shuchat's very, very informative talk, and I was reminded that last week I received the following shaila on WhatsApp. Someone wants to add to Heter Iska the following words, and you can, after you heard Rabbi Shuchat's presentation, you'll see how mufrach, out of the question, what the person is asking. But he's asking as follows, that he wants to add the following clause. Despite anything herein to the contrary, it is expressly agreed between the parties that this document cannot and will not be relied upon or put into evidence in any proceedings in any court in Australia. So you can imagine this Heter Iska document is null and void. The question which I was asked to talk about today is a very complex question, because there's so many details in it. And I want to make a disclaimer from the beginning that what I'm saying now cannot be relied as a generic psak halacha, because there's so many nuances and so many different protim in it. And therefore I will talk about just as much as the time will allow to discuss the main issues. At any time that somebody has a particular shaila, especially shaila that we're talking about the whole hemshech of one's business, it's important to be able to speak to a rov. I certainly will be happy to discuss at some later stage individual questions that people have. I'm talking about if questions come up in the future, but this is just bullet points to be able to see what the issues are. So I'm also received just prior to this talk from somebody a number of questions, and I'll try to address, and that's what I'll try to talk about. So basically basing my talk on the questions which I've received. So the main two subjects is the general subject of doing business online. When somebody has a website, a commerce website, and can this website be open on Shabbos? Does it constitute chilul Shabbos, or does it have to be closed on Shabbos? And again, I want to say that these questions are not always black and white. Sometimes it is praiseworthy. There's a few Gemaras in Shabbos, Gemara Shabbos, that talks about how Tanoim and Amoroim would sometimes do things lifnim b'shuras adin. They would be allowed to do certain things, but they went beyond. And the Gemara talks about it not as a chumrah which has no place, talks about as something which is meshubach, something which is praiseworthy. And many times we see that some businessmen don't want to rely on any heterim. And that's, I think, it's, some chumras they don't really have too much place in halacha, but this chumrah definitely has place. But nevertheless, it's also important to be able to talk about me'ikar adin. What is the halacha? Number one, sometimes situations don't allow for chumras. And also it's important to melamed schus, that people should know that if they're doing something, certain things, it doesn't constitute chilul Shabbos. It's also important to know. So first of all, what could be the problems of conducting business? Let's start with websites. When a person has a particular website that makes kinyonim, and there are three main problems that we are facing over here, three main questions. The first question is the general questions, Mekach Memker. Mekach Memker is a takones chazal, the chazal misaken, that we are not allowed. It's not the raisa, but it's like any other takon of chazal which we have to keep. And in order to avoid certain things like writing, they have instituted the takona that you can't conduct any business on Shabbos. It's a general takona, and it's in halach. It's spoken about in Rambam, Hilchos Shabbos Chav Gimel, halacha Yud Beis, and in Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shinvov. And the Alter Rebbe talks about it in Shavov in Seif Dalet. So over here we're talking about that the sale occurs on Shabbos. So the Chura, that raises the question of Mekach Memker conducting business on Shabbos. The second question, which is related to it, is called Schar Shabbos. The Chazal also forbidden to receive payment for even permitted activity on Shabbos. So if, for example, a person wants to become a babysitter on Shabbos, I mean, there are permitted ways which we'll touch upon how we go about it, because we know that everybody gets babysitter on Shabbos, people get chazonim on Shabbos, people have Balei Koyer on Shabbos and so on and so forth. And obviously there are ways to go around it. But in a very, very black and white sort of way, one is forbidden to do a permitted activity on Shabbos and to receive a schar, to receive a reward for it. And this is another problem, that you are receiving schar Shabbos. And a third possible problem that could be part of it is amir l'nochri. We'll see later on that we sometimes, not in a situation, we're going to talk later on about Amazon and similar things, and fulfillment centers. Over there's a question of Amir al-Nochri, of actually doing something for us on Shabbos. So those are the questions that are connected with having business on internet. So first of all, I want to say that let's discuss it, assuming that the customers are non-Jews, because there's a separate problem. The customers are Jews, and I'll discuss how do we know, because there's always a possibility the customers are Jews. We'll talk about it later. But let's assume right now we're talking about where the customers are non-Jews. And over here, the main achron, the main of the one of the Posek Hador, who lived about 150 years ago, approximately, more, 190 years ago. There was Rabbi Akiva Eger, who lived in the first part of the 19th century. And he wrote in the famous tshuva that everybody talks about. Actually, it's interesting that one of the questions I received today was, and I read what the person wrote, that Rabbi Akiva Eger introduces a novel concept pertaining to the prohibition of Mekach Memker. He proposes that it is not only the act of acquisition, in other words, even when you're not doing anything yourself, which is osur, rather the actual effect of the kinyan is osur as well. So in other words, what he's saying is like this. He's saying that even if you're doing something erev Shabbos, before Shabbos, and this will go in force on Shabbos itself. So, and it's something passive, you do nothing about it. Rabbi Akiva Eger seems to say that it's osur. And there are many poskim who bring him to question some of the things that were very common We'll talk about vending machines. That was today we are more sophisticated. The vending machine was a major shaila came up, and the Moshe Feinstein, he says, and then he questions, he brings somewhat of a limud schus in the Chilul Gimel Orach Chaim. He talks about it, but nevertheless, he says Kfar Hoyer Zokin, and he basically says, "Well, should be choishish," what Rabbi Akiva Eiger says. Now, all of the Achronim who argue with Rabbi Akiva Eiger, they say that the chashash is valid only if the Jew knows that the transaction will take place on Shabbos. But if not, it's not osir. And one of the main, it was like every subject is certain like a classical tshuva that everybody talks about, and the famous tshuva that talks about from a different perspective to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, it's the tshuva of the Marshak. Marshak was Shimon Grimsfeld, was one of the greatest poskim of Hungary, who lived in the second part of the 19th century. There's literally from the three greatest poskim of that time. And the Marshak says that he actually talks about the concept of vending machines. And he says that on both grounds, it's mutter, both because of Mekach Memker and because of Schar Shabbos. And he says as follows, he says that, but he gives a condition. He says that it can be on the property of a Jew. It has to be in a neutral place. That's one of the conditions. And by the way, I just want to give you something which will come up, and it's important to know some of the very fundamental questions. We know that when it comes to Amir Nochri, for example, so not only you are not allowed to have a schir yoim, to have somebody who gets paid per day or per hour, somebody to work for you on Shabbos, to do things for you on Shabbos. But you can have also a kablan. Kablan means somebody who's a contractor, somebody does for you a job. But that applies when the kablan works on the property of a Jew. So, for example, you're not allowed to have a non-Jewish workers build a house for you on Shabbos. However, are you allowed to have somebody do something for you on Shabbos if it's done on their property? So that depends. What I'm saying now is very fundamental for what we're going to talk about later. So if, for example, you will bring a car to a mechanic, and you're going to bring a car to a mechanic on Erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos, and you say, I'm going to pick it up onto Shabbos. So you're basically telling him, I'd like you to do it for me on Shabbos, and you're specifying that. And that's something which is awesome. But if you have a piece of furniture built for you in a non-Jewish factory, and this furniture is being built over 5-6 weeks, there's no question that there's no Isur Amir L'Nochri, because the person is a kabbalah, gets paid by job, and you're certainly not telling him to work on Shabbos. And the fact that he may be working on Shabbos, it's not your geschäft, and therefore that's something which is permitted. So having something on the property of a Jew, it makes it much worse. But if, again, the subject was of these vending machines, this machine you can put money in and get something. So first of all, he says that because it's passive, and he argues against Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he says because the Jew is not specifying, is not having anything to do with the fact that it's done on Shabbos. It doesn't have to be done on Shabbos. It just may be done on Shabbos. Therefore, he says there's no shail of Mekel Chomemker. And also, he says something which is consistent both with the Alter Rebbe in Shilchov Gimel and also with Noide Behuda. He says there's no problem of Schar Shabbos because there's no service. You're not doing a service and you're not doing any like rentals. You're not renting anything else. He says because of that, it happens to be somebody comes in, that puts in the money, he gets something for it. That's not considered neither Mekel Chomemker nor Schar Shabbos. And I must say that the vast majority of Achronim, they side with the Marshag and not like Rabbi Akiva Eiger. And those include Sholem Eshev, who was a great Pesach and Broad. They include Das Teira, the Brezhanarov, who was one of the greatest Galiciana poskim of the 19th century, and also includes, I had it on my table over here, I was looking at it today, but I can't find it right now. It also includes Teiras Chesed of Lublinarov. His name was Shem Zalman of Lublin, who was a great chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he moved later on to Eretz Yisrael. He was known to be a Ga'ana Ga'onim. He wrote fundamental, very, very important shuvas, and he also writes about similar things, and he sides with the shitta of the Marshag rather than with Rabbi Akiva Eger. And later on also we have Chelkas Yankiv, who was the brother-in-law of Minchas Yitzchok. His brother-in-law actually, he questioned it. Minchas Yitzchok, he wrote that in Chelik Gimel, that since the kinyan takes place on Shabbos, it's also even there's no Maisa from a Jew. That's what. Oh, I found Teres Chesed over here. Teres Chesed in Siman Yud Gimel talks about it, and Minchas Yitzchok talks about in Chelik Gimel Siman Lamed Dalet, and he says that since kinyan takes place on Shabbos, it's also even though there's no Maisa from a Jew, and he gives two conditions which we can question them. It's questioned, and we can also question from our logic. He says that number one, he says that the Jew doesn't want to be koine the money until for Shabbos. That's fair enough. That's okay. The Jew definitely doesn't want it. He doesn't mind if money comes afterwards. But the second thing that he says that you have to make it nigh that the kinyan took place already from Erev Shabbos, and this is difficult to understand because how can you make a condition that a non-Jew is koine before Shabbos? Even though he had no intention, he could come and koine afterwards. That's something which tzorich in Godel. But this is, we have a number of achronim like Minchas Yitzchok and like Shevet HaLevi who question the concept, but the vast Rubim Kekulim of Poskim, they agree with the shit of the Marshag and all the Poskim that we mentioned. And they also include the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He talks about, Shlomo Zalman is quick to mention that if it's likely, we talk about Rov is very, it's a big problem. If it's likely that Jews will buy from that, then you should be more, that not Ikar Adin, but it's proper to be more careful. But Chelkas Yankiv, Ber Moshe, the Britzinerov, and all of them, they basically saying that they rule like the Marshag. There's no question of Megach Memker, and there's no question of Schar Shabbos. So to Misakim, the bottom line is that the vast majority of poskim that would say that a Jewish website may remain open on Shabbos. And that is true even if the credit card of the buyer is automatically charged at the time of purchase of Shabbos and Yom Tov. Again, for those reasons that we're given. And but nevertheless, because we have poskim that are machmir, so it would be recommended whenever possible to adjust the automated system that the buyers, that the credit card which belongs to the buyer and is charged and processed after Shabbos. If it's possible to do that, that's definitely is a good thing. And with most websites that I know, and I want to tell you that I'm sure many of you who do business on internet know more about some of the nuances more than I know. I think it's very, I try, because I get the Shabbos, I try to make myself aware of all of the nuances of how these things are conducted. But that's why I'm making a disclaimer that there could be a lot of other points that have to be addressed. So again, I'm giving you a general concept, but it seems that most websites, they work in such a way that the customer is not charged until it's verified that the item is ready to ship. So sometimes it's possible to adjust. But again, I want to say two things. Number one, the Gemara says that in these things, if somebody can be machmir, tova olav bracha, it's not something which is pointless. It's definitely something which is, we know the Alter Rebbe talks about shutfus on Shabbos. And he says himself that whenever possible, shutfus is a necessary, sometimes a necessary mechanism that is done with certain businesses that it's impossible to close on Shabbos, like he gives, tolls and these sort of things. But the Alter Rebbe would say that ideally we should avoid having business open on Shabbos. But again, because the Torah does give us, the Halacha does give us the ability to do it, it's definitely cannot be said that a person is chas v'sholom b'chal Shabbos. We know that there's some famous Jewish businesses like B&H, I think it's called, that does close on Shabbos and very famous for that. And it's something which definitely is a good thing. But we are here to talk about also Ikar Adin, and the Ikar Adin is something which is, according to the vast majority of poskim, is permitted under this circumstance which I mentioned. The second question which was mentioned is the question of fulfillment center. And basically, I'll talk about Amazon separately because Amazon is known to have certain nuances and certain types of contractual obligations which others don't have. But let's first talk about fulfillment center generally. So what they do is they store, they receive orders, they package, they ship to the consumers, they do all of these things. So what are the questions? First of all, Amir Akum, because we know that they're doing work for you at the time. And over here, the Shaila will be, are you Kaveh Malachtei b'Shabbos, which is mentioned in Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch itself, in Reish Mem Zayin, in Reish Nun Beis. When you are actually specifying that you want to work on Shabbos, that's Osir. But the question is that that's not the case over here. It looks like it because you're hiring to process orders which happen on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the question is Mekach Memker, because the websites, they're configured to automatically charge you credit cards and the fulfillment send the orders and processes the order on Shabbos. So over here, there's no, number one, there's no Amir Akum. Why? Because the fulfillment center is not told explicitly that you are required to carry the orders on Shabbos. And according to the Alter Rebbe, in Reish Mem Dalet, I believe, he says that you're not kover melachta b'Shabbos. You only kover melachta if you specify that the work will be done on Shabbos. So I'll give you an example of, when you can't take a car to a mechanic on Erev Shabbos because you basically kover to him Zman Melachta, saying, I want the work to be done on Shabbos. And there's no, again, I'm talking about most poskim. There are some poskim over here that I know poskim who are machmir. I know Rabbi Machmir. I had a discussion with a close colleague of mine who definitely with Amazon is very, very strict. I'll give you my reasons why I think Ikar Adin, it is mutter, except when the storehouse is the Yid storehouse. If the Amazon using their own storehouse, I believe that it's Ikar Adin, it's mutter. But it's definitely also true that the Arabonim who are machmir poskim, but from the actual letter of the halacha, it seems there's no Amir al-Nochri, there is no Mekach Memker, because Mekach Memker, as we mentioned before with the whole Marshag and the whole polemic over there, it's only when intentionally something is scheduled to be, and the mice is scheduled to be done on Shabbos, or when there's some kind of involvement from a Jewish person. But if something's totally passive and there's neither action nor intent, that doesn't constitute a shaila of Mekach Memker. However, we have to know that one should only use the services of such a fulfillment center if it doesn't require to process immediately and or doesn't offer an option that for, if there's an option, which we'll talk about Amazon soon, it is an option that for added fee, you have to expedite the shipping. That already becomes a question. And therefore, you shouldn't guarantee on the website that all orders will go out within X amount of days. Now, Amazon itself has that problem because it has part of the contract that people can pay an expedite. So with Amazon, there are reasons to be makel. First of all,
Rabbi Ulman, if I could just add, I just heard this, that Amazon is making a push to try to get their whole entire system to be a one-day delivery. This is a new push that they're doing. I don't know how long it'll take till they go through, but I'm just throwing that in. I don't know if that adds anything to the conversation.
Okay, it's even today there is an option to do that. Maybe 2 days. I'm not sure. I have to find out from Avinim. But the reason to make is that the Jewish seller doesn't determine whatsoever what happens, and therefore he's not kover melachta b'Shabbos. It's different when we'll talk about in a minute when So if the storehouse is, there are two ways you can work these fulfillment centers. One way is that they do everything for you. They store everything. They store. They package. They deliver. That's one way. And the other way is that it's done in the property of a Jew. And I really think that is a problem. I'm aware that there's some, even very early Chingolite who do that, and I'm sure I would malamed schools that they have a heter from Mirov, but I would imagine that the heter will be with something else. It's not as simple as it seems, because maybe there's shutfus with somebody else, because there is definitely a major problem. How's it different than having your business open on Shabbos? If you're having your own storehouse and everything is packaged over there, and all the work is done over there, then there's no difference than having one's own business open on Shabbos. So that to me is a major problem. And another problem is, with all of the things we mentioned before, is when there is a certain probability that Yidden will be nichshel through our websites and through our business, which is open on Shabbos. How is it? How do we determine? So the Chazal talk from the perspective of Roiv, majority. And this is an example in many places in Shas, we bring that you don't have to be 100% certain, but you have to know that the Roiv of the customers are Goyim, are not Jews. And the fact that the problem of Roiv being Jews is the issue of Lifnei Iver, which means that you're putting a stumbling block. The person may not be frum, but you are causing him to be over on Isurei Shabbos. And that goes by the Rebbe. And therefore, the problem would be if somebody has a business which is primarily directed to Yidden. So, for example, if one has a Judaica or some kind of a Jewish business, or in Eretz Yisrael, where he knows that in Amazon most of the customers will be Jewish people. Over there will be a major problem. But if we have a situation where it could be anybody, then it goes by Roiv in the customer pool of the website, not in the place we live, because the internet is not geographical. It's basically all over the place. But it's basic goes by the majority of the customers. So I think there's a lot of questions which I couldn't touch upon because I only have 25 minutes. But I want to reiterate that if somebody has the ability to be able to close such businesses or to work with Amazon in a way that how to be able to, it's also important to be able to let the customers know what's happening. If somebody that doesn't respond to things on Shabbos, it's important to let, first of all, because of Marisayin, everybody can see that this business doesn't operate on Shabbos, and because you also placate your customers if there's nobody responding to them. But ultimately, whatever one can do in order to be able to close websites or work with a system to avoid working on Shabbos, Tov Olav Bracha. Everything I said now is to Melamed Schus, that those that are operating within these parameters are not Mechal Shabbos, according to most opinions, even though that some would argue.
So Rabbi Ulman, maybe I could just ask you, first of all, it was a fantastic presentation. My mind is still spinning from the amount of Mara Mekaymis that you quoted. But maybe you could, just with the 3 minutes remaining, if you could just, like in a Masakim, summarize just the basic points, just as takeaways for people that are listening, and then we'll move to the Q&A. I see some people posted questions to ask you.
The main points are that both in the question of websites and the question of fulfillment centers, there's also a question of auctions and PayPal, which I haven't touched upon, but in this particular two shilas, Sai in the realm of Mega Chomemker, Schar Shabbos, and Amir al-Nochri, there is no issue according to vast majority of poskim me'ikar adin. For all those reasons, Kaveh Malachta B'Shabbos, it's not something that you are actively pursuing. It's something that you want to be done. Everything is done outside of your realm, of your rotzen. In other words, it's something that sometimes you do have to specify that you're not insisting. The Alter Rebbe says you don't have to actually go beyond that. But as long as you tell people that there's no necessity to do something on Shabbos, in Reishmim, I think it's Reishmim Dalad, the Alter Rebbe says that is already will constitute there's no shaila of Amir al-Nochri. So those are the 3 points that are relevant to both subjects. And most poskim would say that in Ikar Adin, you are not over on Isser Shabbos, but at the same time, if you're able to avoid it, Tova Olecha Bracha.
Okay, so Shukayach, that was a fantastic presentation. I'm sorry we have such a small slot of time. So what I want to ask is all of the Rabbanim that are on